Maggie.
No, worthy of the scroll.
6.
6, you weren't here last week.
We're on Revelation 6.
Yeah, you read all of what. Oh, that's right.
We did all of 5. The focus is on the Lamb. Last week we covered the Lamb and the scroll. We looked at what the scroll was. Tonight we're going to be looking at Revelation 6. We might get through it all, we might not. That's all right. We'll move at the pace we want. So, where we're at now, we're really going to be starting into what most people think of when we think of Revelation. That's what most people are really fascinated by. What's going to happen? Kind of thing. And this is where it kind of begins. And we're going to be doing a bit of cross-reference tonight as we go, so bear with it. That's why I like having ribbons in my Bible. I can jump across pretty easy. But let's just start. We'll read the entire chapter. It's not that long. 17 verses. Let's go. Revelation chapter 6. Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come and see." Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to him over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the soul of those who had been slain for the word of God, and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. I had looked when he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll, and when I looked up, every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every freeman, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" All right. So we're going to be unpacking these seals, but before we do, there's some questions we got to kind of work through. And the first one that kind of is there is, do they happen chronologically, concurrently, thematically? How do they actually happen? And that's an important question. And as I said in the past, I typically come from the school of thought. If you want to know what school of thought I've arrived at, is what's called classical futurism. It's one that you can find in the early church fathers before 300 AD. 300 AD, if you're not familiar with, right around then, there was a shift under Augustine to amillennialism, which all of a sudden starts taking everything symbolically. And so the millennial kingdom is really it's the church, Christ reigning through the church, and we're progressing towards, and everything in Revelation, for the most part, you take symbolically. Classical futurism holds that this is yet to come. And that was, as I said, you can look up Polycarp, Ignatius, a bunch of the others from that time. They all held to it was yet to come. And so when I look at this, I don't come at it from this idea that I'm looking to symbolize everything, unless it's clearly symbolic. And so, for example, when you look at these seals that happen, they're not going to be, I don't think that you're literally going to see a white horse, a black horse, a red horse, and a pale horse move across the earth. These are what's happening in the heavenly realm from the heavenly perspective, but they have a very real impact on earth. And that comes important specifically later. I'm not going to symbolically think that wormwood represents a nuclear disaster that poisons our water. Believe it or not, I read a book years ago from what you'd classify as the post-tribulation view, for the most part, and it made wormwood, the meteor, exactly that. They're like, oh, we get a clue because wormwood means bitterness in Russian, and you remember Chernobyl and all that, and they try to symbolic this. I don't think there's any reason to do that. But the reason I say this is because I also don't think you're going to be able to find this in history yet. And what I mean by that is, particularly when we look at the white horse here, I don't think it's going to represent the church. I don't think it's going to represent the Roman Empire. It represents exactly what it represents, and it is yet to come. And when I look at the seals here, I think that they're more consecutive. They're chronological. They're one right after the other. In other words, they're not all happening at the same time. They blend into one another, kind of thing. And so one leads to the other. And one of the things that I want to compare this to for a second is I want you to go to Matthew 24. If you're not familiar with Matthew 24, it's the Olivet Discourse. And what happens here is Jesus was coming out of Jerusalem, and he laments over Jerusalem. And as they're departing from the temple, the disciples look at the building and they're commenting on the construction and what it looks like. And Jesus says to them, do you not see, surely I say to you, not one stone will be left upon the other that shall not be thrown down. And when they're outside the city, this must have weighed on the disciples' minds. And so they come to Jesus and they ask a question. They're like, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, the disciples make a mistake in their question. They're making an assumption. The assumption is that the destruction of the temple means the end of the age. And so what they don't realize is they've actually asked 3 questions. Now, this isn't the only time something like this happens. The rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he goes, good teacher, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus stops before answering his actual question and backs up and says, well, why do you call me good? There's no one good but God. And what he's doing is like the rich young ruler didn't even realize that he had called Jesus God. And so here the disciples are coming and they're asking what they think is a one-point question, but it's actually a multifaceted question. It's like, when will these things happen with the temple? What will be the signs of your coming and the signs of the end of the age? They actually asked 3 questions. And you can really see in Mark and Luke where Jesus answers the question about the temple. And you can see it fulfilled in their lifetime. But some of the others are going to happen later. Now, keep in mind what we just read in Revelation. When you look at it, you've got the white horse who comes to conquer, the second horse, which is war, the third horse, which is, for the most part, we'll say famine, given the cost of wheat and barley, a day's wages kind of thing. And then you got the fourth one, which is death. And then skip the 5th one for a minute. The 6th one talks about a great earthquake. Now, let's visit Matthew 24, verse 4. And Jesus answered them and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For the nation will rise against nation, the kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And then if you even notice, look what he says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then he continues on about it. Do you notice a similarity in the description that Jesus offers? False Christ's coming. Then you've got wars, rumors of wars. Then you've got famines, pestilences. Then earthquakes, seal 6. These are all described in the same thing. John is seeing this. Now, why is this significant? Well, because what did Jesus say? The end is not yet. Which means these 6 seals are, if you want, and we're going to go through them here individually, they're the prelude of what's really going to happen. And so when you look at this, and they're like, well, would this therefore be in what we'd classify as the tribulation? Well, the answer is yes. But even in our modern understanding, we separate the tribulation into 2 sections. And for the most part, it looks like the first part of the tribulation is, I hate to say this, but according to our look at today, it's almost life as normal. It's there, pestilences, famines, and just look at the last couple of years that we've had, where a drought has hit California constantly. Now, you don't think about that, but they're actually a very big grain exporter, and so it hits. Then you have other places where drought is happening. Wars, every time you turn around, we've got one war, and we've become so numb to it, we don't even really think about the war in Ukraine anymore unless it affects us. And they make an excuse, like putting the gas prices up by 6-7 cents because a strike happened in Russia. But it's been there for so long. Even you think of what's going on in Gaza, they celebrated a peace strike and then it kind of broke again. No real surprise there. But when's the last time we really think about it? It's become so commonplace, we just don't even think about it. And so these 6 seals are the prelude to what is going to come. And you really see that with that last seal where the people start to ask and they realize something now, like the great day of his wrath has come. And so that's why I'm kind of drawn. Like I said, you're free to disagree, but it seems that this is the prelude to really what's going to happen. And so I do hold that these are more concurrent. They build on one another. And it should make no mistake. It shouldn't be a surprise. You got a false one showing up, and then that leads to a certain time, and then wars happen. And as wars happen, that'll bring about famine. And as famine happens, and with the wars going, what happens? Death seems to go. And so that's why I say they're consecutively and they build up. Now, with that, let's look at the seals. So Jesus is opening the seals, and one of the 4 living creatures, we're not told which one, just one of them, and he gives a command, come and see. And so John looks and he sees a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now the question here is, who is it? Or what is it? What does it represent? It's better to understand what does it represent rather than who is it. And it's one of those fascinating things. The reason I say it is because in typical, even classical futurism, dispensationalism, and that, we hold a very specific view of almost of a who is it. But we need to understand more the what. And I'll give you some of the other answers that have been given. And just so you're familiar with them, I don't agree with them. One of them is that this is Jesus himself. And you go, how would that be? Well, what they do is they look at this and then they compare that to Revelation 19. And when Jesus shows up on the scene in Revelation 19, what is he riding? White horse. Like, oh, white horse and crown, and he's coming. He's like, oh, so it represents Jesus. But it doesn't really make sense here. One of the things that also becomes a problem is the four living creatures, because of the context, they're not speaking to John here. They're speaking to the riders, the horses. And the four living creatures would not dare to address Christ. Now, the reason I say the context, you have to look at the actual context. You go back to the Greek, you lose it a little bit in English, where it's like the come and see, so it looks like, oh, it's John. The original NIV captures it a little better, where it's just like a voice going, come, and the rider comes. So this one not being, it doesn't really fit, so some similarities of it being Jesus. The other view that really took off, particularly thanks to Augustine and amillennialism, is that, oh, this represents the gospel. The gospel went out, and even in Matthew 24, you see, well, the gospel will be preached in all nations. And so the gospel goes out and it conquers. And it's conquered kingdoms and nations and empires. And Augustine would think that. Why? Well, because during his lifetime, Constantine issues the decree that the Roman Empire is going to assume his view of Christianity, Constantine's view of Christianity. And so see, the gospel is conquering. The problem with that is it doesn't fit the other three horses. And one of the things that I'm very big on when it comes to certain contexts is you can't just switch modes halfway through. If you remember back when we studied Daniel and the 70 weeks of Daniel, and I showed that, look, it talks about 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and then a separate week. And a lot of times what they want to do is, we know in history that the 7 weeks from the decree went out, the temple was rebuilt, the city was restored, it fit. Then 62 weeks of years later, so weeks represent years, and that it led right to the ministry of Jesus. And then you get a description a little while later about the prince of the people who is to come will desecrate the temple, destroy the temple. And then it talks about this final week. And then what's interesting is they want to kind of break it and try to say, oh, that was represented in Titus, Emperor Titus, when he destroyed the temple and all that. But then it's like, well, it doesn't fit. The rest was very succinct. It was literal. Here's the time period. And so the only thing you can get from that is that the 70th week has not yet been fulfilled. If the others have been fulfilled literally, then there's no reason to suddenly make the last one symbolic. It's got to be filled literal. So the context tells us that. And so here in Revelation 6, you can't go, oh, it's the gospel conquering, and now there's war. Then there's pestilence, and then there's death. That doesn't work. Because the other three clearly are judgments happening in a way. And so it doesn't fit that. So the classical view from dispensationalism and classical futurism, both together, and what you probably already think already, it represents, even according to Matthew 24, false Christ, or ultimately the Antichrist. So it's not the Antichrist himself, but it represents him coming, him offering a type of peace, a type of allegiance that you have to go. And he goes out and he conquers. And we know from other texts when it describes him, he doesn't conquer by the sword. He conquers by conniving. He conquers by diplomacy. He conquers by what he says. And this fits the theme. So he comes and he has a crown here that is given to him. And the crown and the bow represent that he's conquering. And that fits the rest of the context. And so the first thing that kind of happens on the scene is this type of Christ, hence the white horse, but he's not Christ, shows up on the scene as some kind of conqueror, but they won't be seen as a conqueror. Don't forget, the biblical view of things and the world's view of things can be very, very different. If I were to ask you, since we're coming up on Christmas, please describe King Herod. And we would look at it, mostly go, oh, the guy's a megalomaniac, a paranoia who slaughters innocents and deceives just to stay in power.
He was also a genius.
Now, at that time, that's the scripture. From the world's view, though, he has a title. He's called Herod the Great. Why? He built gymnasiums. He built libraries. He's responsible for the temple. Like it or not, he unified the region of Judea under Roman rule. He was considered Herod the Great, but from the biblical perspective, it looked at him and said, he's not great. He's a wicked and terrible man. And so from the world's perspective, they're going to look at this false Christ and they're going to accept him. Didn't Jesus say, if someone comes in his own name, you'll accept? That's what's going to happen. And so from their perspective, it's going to be, oh, he's a great leader. He's unifying us. We love his ideas. And he'll conquer, not by sword, but by diplomacy. And that's what's going to take place. And then following, it should be no surprise, the second seal comes. The command goes out from the second beast, or the second living creature, let me call him right. Another horse, a fiery red one, comes out, and he's granted to take peace from the earth. So again, people are going to kill one another, and there will be given to him a great sword. It'd be no surprise that eventually what would happen when a leader shows up on the scene, it becomes divisive. Even if most people accept the leader, you're still going to have people who are going to say no. All I got to do is take a look at the United States for the last 12 years. Give or take. We haven't quite hit the full 12 years. I'll say 10 years. With the rise, you got Donald Trump with Biden, then Trump again. What have you got? You got them so divided that they'll literally fight each other. And Canada's headed the same way. When you look and you go back 20 years and you talked about Canadian politics, what was it mostly about when they would campaign? Issues. They would say, well, their plan is terrible because this is why. It neglects this and that. Nowadays, I think one of the biggest problems that has happened in the last couple of elections, and I'm talking federal, provincial, doesn't matter, is you've got a group coming up and they don't even have a platform. Their whole platform is, we're not them. They're evil. They're wicked. They want to take your freedoms. They want to enslave you. So vote for us. And most people should be going, that's nice, but what's your platform? What are you actually going to bring? But we're not. It's diving into we're not them. And so even with somebody who rises on the scene, it'd be no surprise that the next progression of this would be war. As people aren't going to want to surrender. People aren't going to want it. And war will break out. The third, it's no surprise, come and see the black horse who comes on the scene. And you run into some interesting questions here too, though. It says, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. And then you go, what is this about? This is why we typically look at this as famine and pestilence, depending how you want to look at it. What is it going on here? Well, as I kind of shared earlier, a denarius isn't much for us. We kind of don't understand that, but that would be a day's wages. If you want, so the typical day's wages today is what, $100 a day, give or take, kind of thing. If you work, what's the minimum wage here, $15 an hour?
No, 20.
No, it's not.
No, that's what most people go for. I think 15 is 17.
What is it, Matt?
I don't know,
15, 16.
Yeah, I thought it's, we'll say 17. We'll make it 17. And then times that by 8. Because an 8 hours day, so we put in. And you guys, that's how much a quart of wheat is to make some bread. Or cheap bread, you use barley. And we look at that and we see that obviously there's going to be some kind of economic upheaval where people can't even really afford to eat anymore. And it's going to be massive. But then the question comes in, why does it mention wine and oil? That's kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Do not confuse oil with oil of today. They didn't have crude oil. They're talking about physical oil, olive oil. These are the luxuries of it. So wine and oil are luxuries, not necessities. And it almost shows that there's going to become a really big split between the groups. You're going to have the rich who are very rich. Oil and wine, they're at their beck and call. They can choose them anytime they want. Or the other people, what are they going to be doing? Struggling to eat. They're going to be searching. They're going to be working hard for little. And I know what we're starting to think. We're going, wait a minute, this is already... Yeah. All we need is somebody to arrive on the scene and go, hey, I've got the answers. Wars are already starting to go, and the economics are starting to go. But it's not everywhere. It's happening in more and more places. And we're starting to see these things start to unpack. And then the fourth one comes out. The fourth seal is open. And what do we get? It says, now when the fourth seal is open, the fourth living creature, it says, come, I look and behold a pale horse. And the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed him. Now, this is kind of an interesting picture. I don't know why. When I was younger and I'd picture that, I'd picture one guy on the horse and then the other one kind of running behind. But it's actually probably better to view this as a two-person horse, where one is riding in the front and the other one's behind him hanging on. And that kind of idea. So Death is the one who's there, and not a second horse or Hades running behind. It's a two-rider horse here. And he's got power over him to kill a fourth of the earth with hunger. That should be no surprise. Yeah, if everybody's struggling to eat, people are gonna die of starvation. The sword, fighting and killing each other, and the wars happening. And then you got the beasts of the earth. It's interesting. And if we actually look, even in modern day, the animals are becoming more brazen. And you can say it's because we're encroaching in their territory some, but I don't know. You've got bears who are walking right up to people's houses now, and people are like, what do I do? Animals are becoming more aggressive. Although there's a question, this is kind of a side. Someone did the numbers one time. It's like, which would be considered the most lethal animal in North America? It's actually the deer. Do you know when people die from hitting a deer? It's not the deer hitting you, it's you hitting the deer. There's more deer hits than moose hits, though. Moose hits, just when they happen, typically be more fatal. Yep. It's just a funny thing. But beasts of the field. And why? Because if it's also drought and stuff, they're going to be starting to hunt for food and go for food. And they'll lose their fear of man. And just so you know, this isn't a surprise. Now, without being a conspiracy theorist, you can actually see where they don't mind if, and this is where you look into the climate culture, if they always decree that the population of the earth needs to decrease for sustainability. So don't think that they're necessarily going to be against this. Because if you lose a quarter of the earth, currently we're sitting close to getting there near 8 billion, I think. You lose 2 billion people, there's more food to go around, more resources. So what's really the issue? And so when you start to look at these things, they build on one another. It's a scary picture, but we can see the groundworks already in play. Now, I'm not saying the seals are opened. I'm just saying we can see things start. And when you continue to go, and this is where most people look, and they make the mistake sometimes. Most people, when they think of Revelation, they think also of the mark of the beast. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But one of the things about it says, you will not be able to buy or sell without taking the mark. People are like, well, how's that going to be? We have cash. But if you start to look, we're already starting to see systems combine where people are starting to track. And people are being okay. And society's starting to close in on itself. In fact, most people don't carry cash anymore. I think it's interesting that when I see people pay with their phones, where they just take their phone, they turn around, it's like, beep, there you go. Now, I admit, I use tap a lot, but I also have a reserve of cash that I keep stored away. Because you never know. It's just things like when I buy things off Marketplace, and you got Christmas coming up, so I store.
Sometimes when family needs cash.
Yeah, when people just need a little bit, I've got cash stored away just in case. But how often? I remember when, just look, was it 2-3 years ago when Rogers went down, and all of a sudden you're like, well, we don't know what to do. And everyone's like, it's eerie, cell phone's not working, cash, can't use this. It's like, and how I've been to a store and all of a sudden I've watched a drive-through line where all of a sudden they go, sorry, our debit machine is down, and just watch all the cars just drive through because they don't have cash. And we're starting to see these groundworks in place. And so this should be a start to wake us up here. To start to go, you know what? These are in place. Now, these are in the heavenly spots, but these have effects on the earth. But now you've got this odd one, this fifth seal. Now, the reason I say it's odd is because it doesn't seem to fit the others. Antichrist, war, famine, death, souls under the altar. What does this mean? Is this one even visible on earth? Is anyone even going to notice that this is happening? Maybe. But it really is kind of strange. He says, look, when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar. Now, you've also got an issue here. There was no altar mentioned before. Remember, John comes into the throne room. What does he see first? No, he sees God's throne. Sees God's throne. Sees the one who's on the throne. Then he comes back. What does he see? Sees the 4 living creatures. Sees the sea of glass. Then he sees the elders. And then the next scene he sees, what does he see? He sees the lamb who comes in. Now all of a sudden, the lamb's opening the scrolls. And then all of a sudden the fifth seal's open. He's like, wait a minute, there's an altar here. Now this shouldn't be a surprise. Because if I ask the question, what really is God's throne room? What is let me ask you this. What does God's palace look like? I think a king has a palace. It's a temple. It's the whole temple. The temple is regulated off of God's, if you want, castle here. The New Jerusalem has a temple. In the temple made by man, that they got the directions for, they copied from the tabernacle. As you worked your way in, the Holy of Holies, on top of in the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant. On the Ark of the Covenant are the 2 cherubim, whose wings touch. And that spot between the cherubim is called the mercy seat. It's a throne. That's where the presence of God would come down and meet with Moses. And so if this is a temple, well, it's no surprise. This is the altar that would be there. It'd be no shock it is. But now that leads us to another question. Which altar is it? The temple had more than one. The tabernacle had more than one. You had 2. You had the altar of sacrifice and the altar of incense. Which one is it? And it's one of those really things. It depends on what you want to focus on here. And the question is, if this is the altar, what's being offered here? Because that will indicate which altar is it.
So incense.
This is a prayer. They're praying. It's the altar of incense. Why would there be no altar of sacrifice? Yeah, it's done. Yeah. The prick of sacrifice has already been offered. It's no longer needed. This is the altar of incense. This is the altar where they come and they offer their prayers and their saints. And that'll come up again. Because it says they come at one point, they'll scoop from the altar, which is prayer and incense, and they cast it down to the earth, and there's thunders and rumblings. And when you look, what you have here is you've got saints who are praying. How long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? So you got an altar of incense here. And the other thing that kind of gives us away is notice that it says, when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain. If it was talking about the fact that they were being offered as a sacrifice, more literally their blood is being shed, then it would probably refer more to blood on the altar, not under the altar, kind of thing. And blood crying out is not a unheard of metaphor in the scriptures. In fact, the very first time of a murder happens in the Bible. It says, do you know your blood is crying, your brother's blood is crying out to me. Here it's the saints calling out. But now we also got another issue to kind of deal with here. I saw under the altar the souls of those. What's going on here? Is this really the idea of there's disembodied souls just kind of hovering around? Well, this is a problem again where our modern thinking kind of interjects in. And the word soul here in the Greek can mean more than just the soul. It can mean more the lives and the persons. In other words, not all the martyrs are going to be like Stephen. What I mean by that is Stephen's being stoned, and what does he do? He says, forgive them. Don't hold this against them. Not everybody's going to be that way. They're going to justly say, Lord, avenge us. In other words, their very lives of the martyrs are crying out for vengeance. And rightfully so, for justice. Why? Because what did it say? It says they're going to hand you over, the time is going to come, they're going to hand you over and think they're doing the right thing. That they're doing the just thing. This is in Matthew. So where's the justice for these martyred saints? Well, they can only do what they can do. They can cry out. And so when you see the word soul here, it's not necessary to add, these are disembodied souls who are here. These are all of the martyrs. Their very life is calling out for how long till he avenges their blood. And so that's perfectly acceptable because the Greek has that meaning. It can mean, as I said, their lives or their persons. I see those under the altar. I see those who have been slain. Not necessarily disembodied, but think of kind of like Samuel. That when the witch of Endor, I want you to call up Samuel, she was shocked because Samuel actually does come, and his first response is, why did you wake me? And so here you can have the same thing, that Jesus opens the fifth seal, and what happens is, from our perspective here, the martyrs become aware. It's like, is it now? Are you now going to avenge? How much longer is it now? And instead of being told, is it that it's now, what are they given? They're given white robes, and they're given assurance. And they go, why would this be? Because for the church, even throughout history, that gets martyred, that's a comforting message. That it just wait, and Christ is going to avenge them. Notice that Jesus didn't say, there's not going to be any avenging. I want you to let that go. He didn't say, I want you to just accept that you were martyred, it's fine. No, he tells them, wait. The time is coming. Here's the white robe. Here's the righteousness of your finished works. Hold on to it and wait. And the reason you're going to wait is there's still more to come. There's more who are going to join you. Now that can be a scary thought, but if you read the Revelation, what does it talk about? It talks about the fact that he would put the Antichrist and his prophet would put to death anybody who refuses the mark. He'll go and make war against the saints and to conquer them. You see, from the world's perspective, he's going to be victorious over them. But the end, what does it say? This is where you continue on. It says, and I looked and behold, I saw a great multitude of every tribe, tongue, and nation wearing white robes and singing. It's like, who are these? These are those who've come out of the great tribulation. They've washed their robes white in the Lamb, and they've had victory. They've conquered him by the word of their testimony and the blood of the Lamb. And then later on in the trumpet judgments, the waters turn to blood, the seas turn to blood, the springs of water all turn to blood. And what do they hear? What's heard in heaven? True and just are your judgments, O Lord, for they have shed the blood of your saints, and you've given them blood to drink. Jesus is going to avenge. That's a scary side of Jesus the world does not want. They want the, everything's okay, you'll be fine, doesn't matter what you do, I love you, continue on, everything's good. And they miss that these judgments, these are from Jesus. I'm going to judge. I will pour out my wrath. I will punish sin, and it will be poured out. And the saints know this, and so they're crying out for this, but they're told, just wait a little while. And so the fifth seal seems to be a time where on the earth it's going to be more persecution against the believers. And why not? You go, what do you mean, why not? Think about this. If the believers are familiar with the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, the pale horse, and they're watching Revelation unfold, what are they probably going to be start doing? Warning. That guy is wicked. Do not follow him. What is happening here that everybody seems to love, because it seems to be going to progression, they're going to be saying, no, it is wrong. And people are like, you're against our society. You don't fit in our society. A couple of years ago at the start of youth group, I did a survey of the youth, and I asked a question on the survey, in your opinion, is the world getting better or worse? And one of them actually wrote, it's like, that really does depend on your opinion. Because for some, they're going to say it's getting better. For others, they're going to say it's worse. And during this time, the Christian, if they're paying attention, is going to go, this is bad. What you're seeing is bad. This unification is bad. Not that unification itself is bad, but what is happening with it is bad. And they're going to be rejected. So is it any wonder that they'd be hunted out? And this is not restricted to either side. This happens in all things. Take a look during the pandemic, where people were hunting down almost people who didn't have the vaccines, didn't have the passports, calling them, oh, you're wicked, you're evil. And they're like, just get it, you can be part of society. If not, we're going to cut you out. Let's flip the other side. When Charlie Kirk was killed, they started hunting down followers of Kirk, hunting down people who had said anything bad about Charlie Kirk, and they were looking not just who they were finding out their names, where they lived, where they worked, and putting pressure on those businesses to make sure that they would lose their job and they wouldn't be able to work anymore. It's not restricted to one side here. It just shows human nature. That if somebody's against us, well, then we want to remove them. And so you had the fifth seal. And the sixth seal here, I'm just going to touch on here. This is the seal that when it's opened, I think is the one that's really going to say, hey, this is how we know it's begun. Those other ones, you can be a little iffy. What I mean by that is because you got horses, you got riders. That's symbolic imagery, but here, it doesn't seem it. This is an earthquake that is so great that it's felt everywhere. Don't be surprised that it says mountains move and that kind of thing. Yeah, because if the plates really break up, it's going to move. It's going to shoot. And everything, it's going to seem like everything's falling and shaking and happening. And people are going to notice that one. Now, I'm going to stop there. We'll come back and visit the sixth seal. And I will tell you the key at the end of this chapter here, before we move into the second, is verse 16 and 17. Because it asks a question. Verse 17 asks the question, and verse 7, or chapter 7, is the answer when we get there. And we'll start to look at that next week.